One very important question that I was asked to reflect upon is the future of the relationship between the EU and Russia. This is by no means a crucial question for the EU, but also a very difficult one, especially because the Russian war against Ukraine is still ongoing, and unfortunately, a peace settlement of the conflict is unlikely, at least in the short term. So, as long as the war rages, it's impossible for Brussels to imagine a meaningful relationship with Russia, which is the aggressor, and of course, the EU sided with the victim, that is Ukraine. Also, there is one fundamental misunderstanding when it comes to the future of the relationship. Often it is imagined that a post-Putin Russia could be a more open, a more democratic, a more liberal Russia. This is not necessarily the case. Putin is now building a liberal system that is more and more similar to a totalitarian system. So if Putin died tomorrow, there is no guarantee that a liberal leader would grab the power. Also because we don't really have in Russia transparent and democratic mechanisms of power transfer. So in that case, in the eventuality that Russia sees a major power transfer, but it stays an illiberal power, the EU should understand and should think about what topic it wants to prioritize for a possible cooperation with Russia. And it still wants to, for instance, cooperate with Russia on the question of climate change or anti-terrorism. This is an important question that the EU should ask itself. But when it comes to the current times, what does the EU should do now vis-a-vis Russia, or more broadly in its policy towards the post-Soviet region? I argue that the EU should do three things. First of all, it should improve the compliance for its sanction regime. Of course, we know that sanctions weren't successful in curbing Russia's military effort in Ukraine, also because there are many countries in the world that don't abide by sanctions and so keep doing business with Russia. So the EU should insist very much on compliance and it should better the mechanisms to have sanctions respected, at least by neutral states. Second, the EU should build and cement ties with countries in the post-Soviet region, especially countries that are trying to break free from their dependency on Russia. That is the case, for instance, of Armenia, which has a very meaningful relationship already with Brussels. At the same time, the EU should also avoid turning those states into the next geopolitical battleground. So it should continue having a good and meaningful relation with those states without, let's say, provoking major instabilities. Third, the EU should think about how it could spur positive change in Russia. There is no need to say that the EU nowadays has very little influence on domestic developments in Russia, meaning that it can't really support those democratic movements and political opponents that are still left in Russia. But the EU could, for instance, help Russian opponents in exile and can help nurture a new political class in exile. But this is not an easy or a risk-free thing to do for the EU. So we want to understand as Europeans, if we want to have a policy, a single united policy vis-a-vis Russian emigres, Russian political opponents who fled Russia after 2022, if we do so, we need to take into account the legitimate security concerns of European states bordering Russia. Those states have grown more and more wary of Russian opponents and Russian emigres coming after 2022, because often there is a risk that among those people fleeing, people from Russian security services or other type of people that pose a significant threat to the national security of those countries are present. So if we want to help Russian political opponents in exile, we should do it taking into account the concerns and security interests of all European states involved.